Usually when we talk about a sterile environment, there is this expectation of absolute purity.
Right, like a high-tech science laboratory or something.
Yeah, think about it. You have the airlocks, the white hazmat suits, those massive filtration systems.
Yeah.
The scientist steps into that room, and they are completely isolated from the outside world. I mean, no dust, no contaminants, absolutely no outside influence whatsoever.
It is a very appealing visual, honestly.
It really is. We love the idea that a person can just strip away all the noise of the outside world, step into a vacuum, and observe something with absolute, untainted objectivity.
Well, the scientific method trains us to desire that vacuum,
Yeah, that makes sense.
The post-Enlightenment world has basically convinced us that the highest form of virtue is the unbiased observer.
Right, like if you have an opinion, you are already disqualified.
Precisely. We have bought into this concept that if you can just divorce yourself from your background, your emotions, and your history, you will finally arrive at pure truth.
But then, you step into the world of human communication and the reading of a text, and suddenly that airlock is broken.
The filtration system totally fails.
Yeah, it does. We are looking at a landscape of human interpretation that is muddy, to say the least. The reality is that the human mind is the absolute definition of a contaminated environment.
It really is.
So with that in mind, welcome to this deep dive on reformed thinking. I am thrilled you are joining us today because we are tackling an idea that shakes up how we read, how we listen, and how we understand the world.
It is a massive topic.
We are pulling our material today from a fascinating book called The Archer and the Arrow, and specifically looking at Chapter 4, written by Phillip Jensen and Paul Grimmond.
And the central premise they present in this chapter dismantles a very specific, a very popular myth.
Yeah, let's get into that.
Well, many well-meaning individuals operate under the assumption that the purest way to read a text, any text, really, but specifically the scriptures, is to approach it as a total blank slate.
Like having zero preconceived notions.
Right. No baggage at all. But Jensen and Grimmond demonstrate why coming to a text with zero bias is not just an impossible physiological and psychological feat.
It's worse than that.
Yeah, it is a dangerous illusion that leads to catastrophic misinterpretations.
So our mission today is to investigate how unseen biases shape our reading. And how to consciously align those biases with truth rather than, pretending they just do not exist.
We really have to shatter the illusion of the blank slate.
Absolutely. The authors start by addressing a very specific label that gets thrown around in certain theological circles. They talk about the phrase, simple Bible preacher.
Oh, yeah, you hear that one a lot.
You do. And you can see the initial appeal of that label, right? If a man stands up and says, I am just a simple Bible preacher, he is attempting to signal transparency to his audience.
He is trying to build trust.
Yeah, he is communicating, I am not giving you my own ideas. I haven't been compromised by lifeless liberalism or academic pretensions. I am reading the words on the page, and I am giving you the pure, unvarnished text.
The intention behind the label might be noble. I mean, I get why people say it.
Sure.
But claiming this status is an exercise in extreme naivety.
Because it assumes too much.
Right. The entire concept operates on the false assumption that a person can somehow be uniquely unaffected by their own existence.
Which is impossible.
It assumes a human being can flip a switch and turn off their culture, their history, their family background, and, well, their inherent flaws.
The authors actually use the specific category of sinfulness here, don't they?
They do. We all have a broken human nature. The mind itself is affected by the fall.
Yeah.
So to claim you can read a text independent of your own presuppositions, whether those presuppositions are good or bad, is a fundamental denial of your own humanity.
I think of this constantly when I meet someone who claims they do not have an accent.
Oh, that is a great analogy.
Right. They will say, I don't have an accent, I just speak normally. You were the one with the accent.
Everybody thinks they speak normally.
But every human being who speaks a language has an accent. Your accent is just the phonetic water you swim in, so you do not hear it yourself.
You are totally blind to it or deaf to it, I guess.
Yeah, it requires interacting with someone from a different region to realize you're pronouncing your vowels differently. And it is the exact same mechanism with our biases and our presuppositions.
Everyone has an accent when they read.
Exactly.
And if you believe you do not have an accent, you will never bother to analyze how your speech sounds to someone else.
You will never adjust your communication.
Right. If you believe you have no biases, it leads to a total lack of personal reflection. The authors point out that this lack of reflection inevitably leads to misreading the text.
Because you aren't checking your blind spots.
The person who thinks they are being the most objective is usually the most blind to their own subjectivity.
Wow, yeah.
You end up finding what you subconsciously want to find, or what your cultural background expects you to find, all while proudly declaring that you are just reading the plain meaning of the text.
This brings us to the central analogy of the book, which provides a brilliant visual for this dynamic.
The arrow analogy.
Yeah. The authors compare a sermon, or really any communication of a text, to an arrow.
Okay.
We know from basic physics that an arrow needs feathers, the fletching, to fly straight. If you shoot a bare shaft from a bow, the aerodynamics are completely ruined.
It just flounders.
Yeah, it will tumble uncontrollably through the air and miss the target entirely.
So in this analogy, the sermon is the arrow, and the speaker's presuppositions are the feathers.
Right.
Every arrow will be affected by the quality, the shape, and the angle of its feathers.
You can't escape the physics of it.
You really can't. And the most uncomfortable realization in this chapter is that, if we are honest, most of our arrows are fitted with feathers plucked from our own tail.
Plucked from our own tail. Man, that imagery forces you to look closely at your own internal motivation.
It does.
Because these tail feathers, they are our favorite theological topics. They are our personal frustrations with the people sitting in the pews. They're our past experiences of betrayal or pain.
We bring all of that with us.
Yeah, when a speaker steps into the pulpit, they bring all of this historical and emotional baggage to their reading of the passage.
Let's say a speaker is harboring a high degree of personal frustration with their congregation.
Okay.
Their arrow is going to veer heavily in the direction of scolding or harshness, regardless of what the text actually demands.
Because the feathers dictate the flight path.
Yes. Unacknowledged feathers cause the arrow to deviate. And the authors make a sharp observation regarding human nature here.
What's that?
Well, because our tail feathers are tainted by our own flaws and our own sin, our arrows will naturally tend to deviate in the direction least likely to pierce our own misunderstandings.
Well, wow.
They veer away from our own specific areas of rebellion.
So we subconsciously steer the arrow away from our own vulnerabilities.
They do.
We aim it at the sins we do not struggle with and at the people we already feel safe criticizing.
The flesh is incredibly adept at self-preservation.
It really is.
Yeah.
But if all of our personal tail feathers are causing the arrow to veer off target, I feel like the logical response for many people is to try and rip all the feathers off.
That is the temptation.
Like, the goal becomes being an unpolluted sponge, someone who just soaks up the text and squeezes it out pure and fresh.
The authors are adamant that the unpolluted sponge is a myth.
Right. We are back to the sterile lab.
Yeah. You cannot rip the feathers off the arrow because, as we established, an arrow without feathers just tumbles.
It won't fly.
You need a framework to read anything. You need categories of language, historical understanding, and logical deduction.
So what is the solution then?
The solution isn't trying to strip away all presuppositions to reach a state of pure emptiness. The solution is acknowledging the existence of our tail feathers and then exposing them to corrective pruning by the text itself.
Pruning. I mean, pruning implies a painful, intentional cutting away of dead or misaligned material.
It is not a comfortable process.
No. Instead of pretending we do not have a framework, we drag our framework into the light. We let the text hack away at the bad feathers and replace them with good ones.
Yes.
We are not aiming for the impossibility of a blank slate. We are aiming for the posture of a highly self-aware reader who constantly allows the authority of the text to recalibrate their internal biases.
And this leads directly to the author's proposed solution.
Which is?
To avoid the trap of the simple Bible preacher myth, an individual must become a self-conscious, systematic theologian.
Okay, wait. The term systematic theologian carries a lot of baggage in the modern world.
Oh, a ton of baggage.
It conjures images of someone sitting in a dusty library, surrounded by massive leather-bound books, categorizing abstract philosophical concepts while being totally disconnected from the gritty reality of daily life.
The stereotype is the ivory tower academic. But the authors clarify what they do not mean by this term. Becoming a systematic theologian does not mean name-dropping historical figures to sound smart.
Like quoting Augustine just to impress people.
Right. It is not about quoting Augustine or Luther just to add a veneer of academic weight to a presentation. It is not about assimilating someone else's thinking just to parrot it back to an audience.
So what is the actual goal?
The goal is to understand God and the world through God's own eyes.
Okay.
To illustrate what a true systematic theologian looks like in practice, the authors point to the historical example of John Calvin and his magnum opus, The Institutes of the Christian Religion.
Oh, that is a perfect case study.
The development of that specific work shows this concept perfectly.
Because the Institute started in 1536 as a relatively short tract, right?
Yes, very short.
It was designed to give theological students a basic introduction to reading the Bible. But by the time it reached its final edition in 1559, 23 years later, it had grown to almost 5 times its original length.
It became massive.
That massive expansion over 2 decades reveals something crucial about Calvin's methodology.
It does. The expansion happened because Calvin was not sitting in an isolated room dreaming up abstract philosophical systems.
It wasn't in the ivory tower.
No, he was constantly preaching through the actual individual books of the Bible, day by day, in Geneva.
Wow, day by day.
Yeah, he wrote extensive commentaries on almost every book in the scriptures. His massive, overarching systematic theology was built entirely upon rigorous, daily, exegetical interaction with the text itself.
So his system was tested daily.
Right. When he encountered a passage that challenged his current system, he adjusted the system.
Okay, so his grand theological framework was not a rigid grid imposed top-down onto the text.
Not at all.
It grew organically from the ground up, out of the text.
Yeah.
He recognized that to read a book properly, you need to understand its key themes. But those key themes must be derived from the book itself.
Yes, he argued that we need to read sympathetically, assuming the framework of thought of the author.
And this brings the discussion into a massive collision with modern epistemology. We hit the myth of neutrality again.
We do.
In our rationalist, scientific world, society dictates that the only valid way to observe reality is with absolute objective neutrality. The historian or the scientist demands a neutral stance, assuming that any prior allegiance invalidates the findings.
But the authors argue that when it comes to the scriptures, you cannot approach the text neutrally.
You shouldn't even try.
Right. You should not even desire to do so. The text itself demands a specific posture from the reader.
What kind of posture?
Well, the authors use the example of an atheist approaching the Bible. If an atheist comes to the text with a posture of skepticism, disobedience, and hard-heartedness, they will consistently misread the intent of the passages.
Because they are reading it against the grain of the author's intent.
Exactly. The authors state that the text requires an obedient reading.
Okay, but the concept of an obedient reading causes immense friction for the modern mind.
Oh, absolutely. People push back on that hard.
The immediate fear is that if we approach a text with a pre-decided framework of obedience, like if we decide beforehand that we're going to submit to its authority, aren't we just creating a massive echo chamber?
That is the standard critique.
Yeah. The critique is that this approach leads straight into postmodern relativism, where the text becomes a mirror that only reflects back whatever the reader already wants to see.
But the difference between postmodern relativism and an obedient reading lies entirely in where the locus of meaning originates.
Okay, break that down.
Postmodern relativism asserts that a text has no objective meaning at all. It claims the reader supplies all the meaning based on their sociological context.
Right.
The framework the authors are arguing for is the exact opposite. They assert that the author, capital A, God has embedded an objective fixed meaning into the text.
So the obedient reader is not supplying their own meaning.
No, they are actively adopting a posture that allows them to hear the meaning that is already present. Our systematic theology, our doctrine, must continually grow and reshape itself to match that objective reality as we read.
So the framework is not a mirror reflecting our own desires.
Not at all. It is a window we are looking through. And we have to keep wiping the smudges of our own biases off our side of the glass so we can see the objective reality outside clearly.
I love that. The framework is not a cage that traps the text. It is a scaffolding that helps us climb higher to inspect the text more accurately.
That's a great way to put it.
When we see something in the text that contradicts our scaffolding, we don't ignore the text, we rebuild the scaffolding, we read the text doctrinally, and we evaluate our doctrine textually.
It is a continuous dynamic loop of submission and correction.
Okay, to ground this theoretical discussion in reality, the authors provide a rigorous test case.
Yes, a very famous one.
They pull from one of the most famous and difficult sections of the Bible, the Sermon on the Mount. Specifically, Matthew chapter 5, verse 20.
Where Jesus says, "For I tell you, Unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven.
The psychological weight of that statement for a first-century audience would have been crushing.
Unbearable.
The Pharisees were the undisputed champions of rule-keeping. They had built an entire societal structure around meticulous adherence to the law. They tithed their spices, they fasted twice a week.
They were the gold standard of religious devotion.
Yeah, and Jesus looks at an audience of normal, struggling people and says, you have to be better than them.
The dilemma for the communicator is how to handle that immense tension.
Right. What do you do with that arrow?
The authors outline two common knee-jerk reactions that people fall into when they hit a difficult, demanding verse like this.
What is option one?
Option one is the face value trap.
The face value trap happens when a speaker isolates the verse, takes the words in their most terrifying literal sense without any broader context, and weaponizes it.
Yes.
They tell their audience, Jesus set the standard. You need to double your human efforts. You need to try harder, be better, and outwork the Pharisees to earn your salvation.
It sounds incredibly pious and serious.
It plays right into the human desire for a meritocracy.
But the problem with the face value trap is that it does immense structural violence to the rest of the text.
Because it contradicts other parts.
Exactly. If you read the epistles of Paul, particularly Romans and Galatians, the text explicitly and repeatedly argues that human works cannot justify a person before God.
Right.
By falling into the face value trap, the speaker pits Jesus against Paul. They break their own theological scaffolding and present a contradictory message.
Then we have option two, which I call the quick retreat.
Okay, option two.
If option one is legalism, option two is a form of functional antinomianism.
Just dishing the law entirely.
Yeah. The quick retreat happens when a speaker immediately runs back to the safety of their systematic theology to neutralize the tension of the verse.
They want to make the discomfort go away.
Right. They look at Matthew 5:20 and say, well, Jesus is just setting an impossibly high standard here to prove a point. He knows we can't do it. The Pharisees couldn't even do it. He just wants us to feel guilty, realize our total inability, give up trying, and trust his grace instead.
Option two treats the passage like a rigged carnival game.
Oh, explain that.
Think of those games where the basketball hoop is deliberately bent into an oval, or the milk bottles are weighted with lead at the bottom.
You can never knock them over.
Exactly. The designer of the game knows you are not going to win. The game is specifically designed to frustrate you into handing over your money so you can just buy the stuffed animal instead.
So option two treats the ethical demands of Jesus as a rigged game designed only to produce despair.
Yes. The authors explain in deep detail why option two completely fails the text.
Because you are ignoring what Jesus actually says.
When you treat the command like a rigged game, you basically gut the actual words of Christ. You are making him say something entirely different from what is on the page.
Give an example from that passage.
Well, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus doesn't just say anger is murder to make people feel bad about their internal state. He immediately follows it up with a practical, physical command. Therefore, go and be reconciled with your brother.
He expects tangible action.
Right. He is not just pointing out sinfulness to prompt a crisis of confidence. He is demanding a reality. He says earlier in that same chapter that whoever does these commandments and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven.
So doing the law actually matters.
It does. You cannot wave a magic wand of grace-based systematic theology to make the strict ethical commands disappear.
Okay, so if option one forces us into an impossible legalism, and option two guts the ethical demands of the text entirely, the solution must lie in a better framework.
Yes, a self-conscious systematic theologian solves this dilemma by forcing integration.
Integration.
You have to integrate this specific high-demand command with the massive overarching narrative of the whole text. The solution requires pulling in other load-bearing pillars of the theological framework.
What pillars do the authors pull in?
The authors take us back to the Old Testament prophets, specifically Ezekiel 36 and Jeremiah 31.
Okay, the New Covenant passages.
Exactly. These passages diagnose the root of the problem. The stated problem was never the strictness of the rules. The problem was the hard-heartedness of the people.
They had hearts of stone.
But the prophets outline a promise that a day is coming when the Spirit will actually change the internal nature of the people. He will remove the heart of stone and give a heart of flesh.
The new covenant promises a new internal capacity.
Yes.
Then you pull in Romans 13, which states that love fulfills the law.
Right.
When you snap all these pieces together, the ethical demands of Christ, the new covenant promise of a changed heart, and the fulfillment of the law through love, you get the true, robust picture.
Jesus is not setting up a rigged carnival game. The game is real. The standard of exceeding the Pharisees is real, but the player is given an entirely new capability to participate.
And their new heart.
Yes. Spirit-fueled believers are fundamentally changed at the level of their desires. They actually want to obey.
The desire to maximize obedience becomes a delight, driven by love, rather than a crushing external burden driven by fear.
A robust, systematic theology allows you to say what Jesus says, that the standard is incredibly high, without blunting his point, but placing it perfectly within the context of a transformed heart.
So you don't have to choose between taking his commands seriously and trusting the broader narrative of grace. The framework holds both realities in perfect tension.
And that is the beauty of choosing your feathers wisely. When your theological framework is built correctly, it allows the arrow to fly straight into the tension of the text.
It hits the center.
Right. It doesn't veer off into moralistic legalism on one side, and it doesn't drift into lazy antinomianism on the other. It hits the center of the target.
But building that framework takes immense, sustained effort. The authors do not leave the reader hanging with abstract theory.
No, they are very practical.
They outline 4 highly practical pillars for anyone who wants to develop their reading framework and grow intellectually and theologically. These pillars require serious discipline to implement.
Pillar number 1 is to keep reading.
Okay, reading what?
The focus here is on reading broadly, especially the uncomfortable parts of the text. If your theology must be sourced from the scriptures, you cannot limit your intake to your favorite passages.
The authors challenge us to make an intentional effort to read the sections we naturally avoid.
Because those areas of avoidance are usually the exact spots where our current scaffolding is weak or misaligned.
The temptation is to stick to the Psalms and the Gospels and ignore the genealogies, the minor prophets, or the dense argumentation of Hebrews.
They all do it.
But reading the uncomfortable parts leads directly into pillar number 2, which is arguably the most counterintuitive piece of advice in the entire chapter.
The authors instruct the reader to rejoice in confusion.
The instruction to rejoice when you do not understand a text pushes against every natural human instinct.
It really does.
Because in the real world, hitting a wall of confusion does not bring joy. It brings panic. It brings frustration.
Oh, definitely.
Imagine a pastor or a teacher sitting in their office on a Friday afternoon trying to finalize a message. They hit a verse that makes 0 sense, or worse, a verse that seems to contradict the entire premise of the sermon they just wrote.
The stress level skyrockets.
Well, throw a party. They freak out.
The authors acknowledge the intense pressure of the workly grind.
It is real pressure.
The busyness of a communicator's life, the deadlines, the need for immediate practical applications, the administrative burden of running an organization creates an environment hostile to deep contemplation.
So what happens?
When you hit a verse that disagrees with your current framework, the easiest, fastest, and most pragmatic thing to do is to just explain it away or skip it entirely.
You sweep it under the rug to save time and save face.
Yes.
But the authors insist this pragmatic reaction is a tragic missed opportunity. When the text disagrees with you, it is not a nuisance. It is an invitation to repent and to grow.
And if you consistently gloss over the difficult parts, they offer a stark warning. You will remain a perpetual infant, and you will end up leading a congregation of babes.
A congregation of babes. That is a sharp critique of intellectual and spiritual laziness.
It hits hard.
The way out of that panic connects directly to pillar number 3. Pursue formal education. This is the mechanism that allows a person to actually rejoice in confusion.
Now, some might view formal education as an unnecessary luxury or an academic distraction from practical ministry.
Right. Why is formal education presented as the antidote to the panic of confusion?
Formal education provides the necessary ballast for the ship.
Explain that.
The authors describe the rough and tumble of daily life and pastoral work. When you are dealing with constant pragmatic challenges, putting out fires, answering urgent emails, managing staff conflicts, counseling people through crisis, your beliefs can easily get pushed around.
By whatever is most urgent or whatever makes the loudest people happiest in the moment.
Exactly. You become a victim to the tyranny of the urgent, and your theology becomes entirely reactive.
So how does education fix that?
Formal education learning church history, Studying philosophy, mastering the original languages, teaches a person how to think structurally. It gives you the structural integrity to critique your own culture.
Ah, I see.
When confusion hits the text, you don't panic because you have the tools to dismantle the problem. You understand the historical context. You recognize the philosophical assumptions at play in the translation.
You have the anchor that keeps you from drifting into pragmatism when the text challenges your assumptions.
Yes. The goal of education is not the accumulation of theological trivia for a parlor game.
Right. It's not just to sound smart.
The goal is building a reinforced hull for your mind so you can weather the storms of textual tension.
And this leads to the fourth pillar, lifelong learning. Formal education is just the launching pad,
The authors stress the necessity of reading outside your normal circles.
which is hard for people to do.
Very hard. In the early stages of development, you lay ground-level stones by reading the classics within your own specific tradition. You learn the language of your theological heritage.
But as time goes on, you have to read people who ask questions you would never naturally think to ask.
Yes, you have to expose yourself to thinkers who press you, to articulate why you believe what you believe.
You are constantly hunting for new feathers, testing them against the scriptures to ensure your arrows are flying as true as possible.
This rigorous, lifelong process of structural refinement is what builds a true biblical theologian.
And this transitions the discussion into the final major section of the chapter. The authors move from the mechanics of systematic theology to defining the parameters of biblical theology.
They break biblical theology down into two massive, load-bearing concepts.
What's the first one?
The first is progressive revelation. This is the understanding that the text unfolds organically over time.
Like a story.
Exactly. The way you read a book from the beginning of the timeline, like Deuteronomy, is fundamentally different from how you read a book near the end of the timeline, like Philippians.
Because the plan of redemption is unfolding sequentially.
Yes. The seed is growing into a mature tree. You don't treat the seed the exact same way you treat the branches, even though they share the same DNA and are the same organism.
The revelation is expanding.
Right. And the second concept of biblical theology is that all the promises made throughout that progressive timeline find their ultimate yes in Christ. Everything points to one singular culmination point.
Here we encounter another massive modern dilemma that the authors tackle head-on. It is the problem of the historical gap.
Oh, the 2,000-year gap.
Yes, the 2,000-year gap between the writing of the New Testament and our current reality is a source of absolute panic in modern academic circles.
The modern academic mindset looks at the ancient culture, the dead languages, the agrarian societal structures of vastly different political realities, and the assumption is that the text is hopelessly trapped in its own time.
The prevailing thought is, there is no way a document written to a first-century Greco-Roman audience can speak directly and authoritatively to a 21st century digital culture.
So to solve this perceived problem, modern academics try to build massive, highly complicated hermeneutical bridges across this gap.
Like using the historical critical method to dissect the text into sources.
Or they try to demythologize the text.
What does that look like?
Well, stripping away anything supernatural like miracles or the resurrection to find some generic, palatable moral lesson about being a good neighbor.
Right. And others look for hidden liberationist meanings, arguing that we need to read against the grain of the original authors because the authors were trapped in oppressive patriarchal structures.
They invent new meanings that the original writers supposedly didn't even know were there.
All these methods share one core, arrogant assumption, that whatever the text means today, it probably doesn't mean what it meant back then.
But the authors of our source make a radical counterclaim against this academic consensus.
They argue that this entire panic over the cultural gap is misguided.
They state that the 2,000-year gap does not matter in the way modern academics think it does.
It is a stunning assertion that completely bypasses the need for these complex bridges.
They argue there is really only one historically significant dividing line in all of human history.
The dividing line is not the Enlightenment. It is not the Industrial Revolution. It is not the Information Age.
No, the only line that matters is BC and AD.
The coming of Christ is the Great Disruption. Before that line, God's plans were revealed in shadow and type. They were promises waiting for a reality.
After that line, the promises are fulfilled. The reality has arrived.
Think of watching a complex thriller movie with a massive twist ending.
Oh, I love this comparison.
During the first half of the movie, the plot might feel confusing. The characters are taking actions that seem disjointed. The dialogue feels cryptic.
You are just trying to piece it together.
But then, the twist happens. The big reveal drops. Suddenly, every single confusing scene from the first half clicks into place.
Once you know the twist, you don't need a cultural translator to rewatch the beginning of the movie.
Exactly.
You don't need to invent hidden meanings or demythologize the early scenes. The ending reframes the entire narrative and makes perfect sense of the whole story.
The authors are stating that Christ is the twist ending that makes sense of the entire ancient text.
The shadow makes sense because we have seen the solid object casting the shadow.
The early believers in the first century didn't panic about the thousands of years between them and Moses.
Oh, they didn't.
They didn't feel the need to build academic bridges to cross the cultural gap between the Exodus and the Roman Empire. The gap was already bridged by the fulfillment of the promise in Christ.
What separated a Greek person in the first century from an ancient Hebrew wasn't language or culture, it was their relationship to the fulfillment of the promise.
Once that fulfillment occurred, the ancient text became entirely accessible.
The fundamental human reality hasn't changed. The authors argue for the universal nature of the text based on a shared spiritual anthropology.
The core realities that bind all of us together as human beings, whether you live in ancient Babylon, first century Rome, or 21st century New York, are identical.
We share a common descent from Adam.
We possess the same inherent flaws, the same rebellion, and the same desperate need for forgiveness.
The gospel bridges all cultural gaps because it addresses the bedrock condition of humanity, a condition that technology and time cannot alter.
Because the human condition is static, the original author is still speaking. The authors pull a brilliant exegetical example from the text to prove this point.
They point to Hebrews chapter 3.
Right, the writer of Hebrews is quoting Psalm 95, a text written centuries earlier by David.
The grammatical choice the writer of Hebrews makes is astounding.
The writer doesn't say, look at what God said way back then.
No. The writer says, as the Holy Spirit says, present tense. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts.
Today.
The theological assertion is that the author is still actively speaking through the ancient text right now in the present moment.
The text is not a dead artifact preserved in a museum case. It is a living, active voice.
The most up-to-date theories about cultural meaning and sociological context are entirely secondary to the posture of the reader.
The real issue is not whether we have the intellectual capacity to decipher the ancient culture.
The real issue is whether we are willing to hear the voice and submit to it.
On the last day, no one is going to be able to stand before the throne and say, the cultural gap was just too wide. I couldn't understand the ancient Near Eastern context. The agrarian metaphors were too foreign, so I'm off the hook.
That won't work.
The text assumes it's entirely clear enough to hold every single human being accountable, regardless of their zip code or the century they were born in.
This brings the entire discussion full circle back to the myth we started with.
We started by looking at the myth of the simple Bible preacher, the person who thinks they can read a text with zero bias, operating like a sterile science lab.
We have seen that this ideal, unbiased reader simply does not exist.
We all have an accent. We all have tail feathers glued to our arrows.
The most faithful communicator, the most honest reader, is not a blank slate.
The most faithful reader is a highly self-aware, constantly growing, self-conscious theologian.
It is someone who knows the specific shape of their own biases, understands the massive overarching framework of the scriptures, and allows the living voice of the text to constantly prune their feathers and correct their vision.
The lesson is undeniable. You must choose your feathers wisely so your arrows fly true.
You must be willing to look at the mud on your boots rather than pretending you are standing in a sterile room.
Acknowledging your presuppositions is the first step toward aligning them with the objective truth of the author.
This changes everything about how we process information, not just in our theology, but in every aspect of life.
That leaves us with a final lingering thought for you, the listener, to mull over today.
Think about the media, the articles, the books, or the audio you consume daily.
Think about the voices you let into your head. What unseen feathers have those sources glued onto their arrows without you even noticing?
And more significantly, how might those unexamined biases be steering your daily decisions, your judgments, and your theology right at this very moment?
We all have them. The question is whether we are willing to do the hard work of looking at them.
It is hard work, but it is necessary.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep checking your feathers, and we will see you next time on Reformed Thinking.